Hey guys, tonight we open the pages of an ancient tale, one inked not in letters, but in fire, bone, and the howling wind of forgotten battlefields. The story we unravel now belongs to none other than the dark goddess of destruction, Kalishi, who dances in cemeteries, drinks from the skulls of demons, and smiles while the world trembles. Imagine this, a battlefield stretching farther than any horizon you've ever seen. The sky burns like brass. The ground is soaked not with rain, but with the blood of the arrogant and the wicked. Every step you take squelches with the weight of violence long since dried. In the distance, drums, thunder, swords clash, but beneath it all, there's something deeper, a pulse, a hunger, something older than the gods themselves, waiting to rise. This is not a gentle bedtime story. In fact, you probably won't survive this one, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your city and what time you're listening from. I'd love to know who's traveling through the darkness with me. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the age before kings, before calendars, before even language had settled into shape, the world groaned under the weight of chaos. The Asura's beings of darkness, pride, and boundless appetite had clawed their way into the realm of the gods. They did not come with reason or treaty. They came with ambition, swords, and sorcery forged in hellish stars. At the heart of the siege stood Mahishasura, the buffalo demon, whose name alone chilled even the boldest of devas. His breath brought drought, his hooves crushed mountains. For eons, no god could match his strength. One by one, they were thrown down, their palaces burned, their prayers echoing unanswered through the void. The heavens trembled. It was then, when all hope fractured, that the gods did something they had never done before. They pooled their power not for creation, not for blessing but for war. From this collective blaze of divine fury rose Durga, the lion-riding warrior goddess, beautiful, terrible, and unstoppable. But Mahishasura did not fall easily. His army was endless. For every head that rolled, another 5 rose in its place. The battlefield grew wild, disorderly, feral. Durga fought without ceasing, her weapons moving like meteors through the sky. But even she, born of every god's might, began to burn with the kind of rage that cannot be channeled, only released. And so, from the center of her brow, where concentration folds into wrath, came a splitter fissure, thin as a hairline crack. Through it, the fire of pure destruction poured forth. From that fire, Kali was born, not as a whisper or a cry, but as a scream. She did not descend. She erupted, her eyes opened wide, seeing not just the demons before her, but all illusion. Her tongue spilled out, blood-red, thirsting. Her skin was the color of midnight, darker than shadow, darker than regret. Her hair uncoiled like serpents, wild and alive. She wore no crown. She needed none. She wore a skirt of severed arms and a necklace of heads, gifts, perhaps, from earlier campaigns, or promises of what was to come. And she laughed, not cruelly, not joyfully, but with the clarity of something that knew exactly what she was for. She was not made to protect. She was made to end. With every step Kali took, the earth recoiled, grass wilted, rivers curved away. Even the wind hesitated, uncertain if it could carry the sound of her scream without being torn apart. The demons tried to fight her. Some charged with blades. Others hid behind shields of black magic and curses. None lasted more than a breath. Her arms were a blur of slicing motion, each hand wielding a different weapon. A sword in one, a trident in another, a flaying knife, a decapitating discus, and of course a skull cup, waiting to be filled. A mainstream historical fact here. The name Kali derives from Kala, the Sanskrit word for time, not just tick-tock time, but time, as in the ultimate devourer, the black curtain, that swallows every moment, every breath, every kingdom. To worship Kali was to face that devouring force without blinking. Quirky, fringe tidbit. Some early tantrikas, those wild mystics who danced at the edges of religion, believed that Kali wasn't born from Durga or any god. They whispered that she was the true face of the universe before light arrived. The original void, creation's own terrible mother. As Kali's carnage unfolded, the battlefield turned unrecognizable. She danced upon corpses, her feet crushing the spines of demons and gods alike. Blood sprayed like holy water, eyes rolled in panic. Even the sky seemed to grow afraid, turning a dull bruised red and refusing to shine. Historians still argue whether Kali's myth emerged as a response to ancient battlefield trauma, or whether she was always there lurking in pre-Vedic tribal faiths, a goddess older than the Vedas themselves. Back in the story, no one could stop her, not even Durga, who now stood still, shocked at what she had unleashed. You can almost picture the gods retreating, murmuring to one another behind trembling hands. Was this a mistake? But how does one call back what has already been set? Free, Kali pressed forward, no longer content with just demons. Her blade began to carve through the fabric of reality. Time itself seemed to ripple. Past and future lost meaning. What mattered now was blood, movement, and release. Until a figure appeared, not with thunder, not with fire, but with stillness. Shiva, the ascetic, the yogi, the destroyer, husband of Parvati, the gentle form of Durga, lord of cosmic silence. He stepped into the path of the goddess, not to fight, not to speak. He simply lay down flat, on the ground, beneath her feet, and in the moment Kali's foot touched his chest, the earth paused, her eyes opened wide again, not with rage this time, but recognition. Here was the only thing more powerful than bloodlust, connection. She stopped, just like that, no thunderclap, no divine edict, only breath, and quiet, and in that breath, the universe reassembled itself, the battlefield dissolved, the gods exhaled, the demon king was no more, and Kali, dark mother of the end, stood motionless above her consort, still trembling but now awake. She had tasted annihilation and found stillness sweeter. But peace, as the ancients knew, is not the end of the story, is merely the breath between verses. Kali did not vanish when she stopped. She did not dissolve into light or collapse into regret. No, she stood still atop Shiva, her foot pressing gently into his chest, her weapons slick with celestial blood, her necklace of severed heads clinking softly in the wind. Her tongue still red, still lolling dripped, the memory of what had been, and the gods watched. They dared not move, for what had emerged was not merely a force of destruction, it was something truer, older, a being so vast and primal that even the word goddess seemed like a timid nickname. Kali stepped back. She looked down at the body beneath her. Shiva, lord of endings, whose stillness had become her mirror. Some say she wept then. Others say she laughed, a sound like cracked bells echoing through infinite space. But no text, no seer, ever claimed she spoke. For what could be said after such a dance? She turned and walked away. But where does a goddess like Kali go? Not into hiding, no, into myth. Not yet. She walked into the dark places of the earth, to forests, untouched by temples, into caves where breath froze on the walls, into the dreams of the wild and the outcast. The battlefield had changed her, yes, but it had not emptied her. Her hunger was not gone, it had only shifted. There are stories, so many stories that tried to contain what came next. In some, she wandered through the forests of India, followed by jackals and owls, her laughter echoing through the trees like a storm not yet born. In others, She stood at the edge of the cremation grounds, watching flames consume flesh, whispering secrets to those who dared meditate among the bones, and in one tale, perhaps, the strangest of all, she appeared to a poor hunter named Rek, who had offered the last drop of goat's blood he owned at a stone altar in the jungle. She came to him not as a vision, not as a dream, but in flesh, towering, silent, real. "Is this enough?" he had asked. She said nothing, but the next morning, his enemies were all dead. That is the shape of Kali's favor, unpredictable, terrifying, and absolute. She began to appear in more places, in the symbols scratched on cave walls, in the chants muttered by lone women grinding millet before sunrise, in the dreams of men who awoke screaming, clutching their throats. The myths multiplied like fireflies, bright and flickering, none alike, but all with the same center, a black-skinned goddess who demanded nothing and everything. Her appearance was not random, nor was it benign. Wherever order became brittle, wherever power grew arrogant, wherever the world dared imagine it had no need of humility, there Kali emerged. Sometimes she was worshipped openly in wild, flame-lit festivals where animal blood ran in rivulets past the feet of dancing priests, but often she was hidden in coded songs, in the tattoos on a widow's ankle, in the whispered prayers of women about to give birth without a midwife, or men going to war with no armor. Her form, too, changed. Or perhaps she simply allowed herself to be seen differently. In Bengal, she grew lean and long-limbed, her hair cascading like river roots, her forearms reaching with unsettling grace. She stood upon Shiva, yes, but not with malice, more like a child waking an unmovable parent. In Nepal, she took on masks of blazing red and gold, her eyes bulging with divine rage, worn by dancers in festivals where time itself was said to pause. In Tamil Nadu, they called her Katravitha, ancient war goddess, protector of the hunt and patron of victory. Some say she was never just one goddess, that Kali was the name we gave to a force, already braided through a dozen forgotten forms. Historians still argue whether Kali evolved from earlier tribal deities, absorbed into the Hindu pantheon, or whether she descended directly from Vedic traditions as a shadowed twin to Durga. The truth, of course, dances in the space between in written, felt only in the marrow, and what of her adornments? Every item on Kali's body told a story, a grim, poetic, irresistible story. Her necklace of heads, each one represented a letter of the Sanskrit alphabet, not trophies but syllables, symbols of knowledge. She wore the very sounds that built creation, severed and reclaimed. Her skirt of arms, a reminder that karma action must be surrendered. Hands that grasp and take are offered back in humility. Her lolling tongue, a mark of shame. Some say it's stepping on Shiva, others say it was hunger, or perhaps mockery. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the truest expression of ecstasy, unfiltered, uncontrolled, unashamed. Mainstream scholars lean toward the interpretation that Kali's iconography emerged from tantric imagery meant not to horrify, but to force a confrontation with fear, with mortality, and with the illusion of self. And yet, in remote corners of the subcontinent, mothers still hush their children with tales of Kali's tongue-tasting naughty boys. So it goes. One particular story stands out. In a village whose name has long been swallowed by history, there lived a sculptor who had never seen the goddess, but dreamed of her each night. Her face would hover behind his eyelids, shifting, vanishing, returning again. Finally, unable to bear the silence, he set to work. He sculpted her from dark stone quarried from a cursed hill. He gave her 4 arms. He gave her eyes that did not look outward, but inward. He gave her a smile, teeny, barely visible, like a secret between gods. When the statue was unveiled, the village shuddered. Some said it breathed, others refused to walk near it at night. The sculptor himself vanished shortly after, but the shrine remains. No one dares to move it, not because of curses, Because the goddess is there, not represented, present, quirky, detail. In parts of eastern India, Kali is said to love hibiscus flowers, bright, red, and blooming only briefly. They're laid at her feet during puja. Locals say she smiles on those who bring them. Some say she even drinks their color, and so Kali, dark goddess of blood and liberation, becomes both feared and beloved. Mothers pray to her for strength. Outcasts sing to her when no other deity answers. Widows, denied the right to live fully under other gods, find refuge in her shadow. Kali does not ask them to be pure, only true. Meanwhile, the world turns. Civilizations rise, full of their own stories and certainty. And always, beneath the noise, the rhythm of Kali continues steady as a drumbeat in the bones of the earth. You see, she is not bound by temple or text. She waits, not for worship, but for the next time arrogance swells too large, and the cosmos forgets who really writes the ending. Then, perhaps, her foot will rise again, and the stars will remember their place. Time, when spoken of in the company of gods, moves strangely. What mortals measure in hours or years, the divine experience as breath or thunderclap. And so it was that, long after her first dance across the battlefield, Kali stirred once more, not with wrath this time, but with warning. For the world had begun again to tilt toward imbalance. In hidden chambers, the asuras whispered. Not all had perished. Not all darkness can be slain by sword or flame. Some had gone underground into the minds of men, into the corruption of kingdoms, into hunger disguised as law. And Kali knew that, so she returned not in fire, but in shadow. Her signs were subtle at first. The sudden shriek of a crow at dawn, the drying of rivers in midsummer, the dreams of children filled with crimson moons and silver-eyed women. In the deepest forests, the animals grew restless. Owls circled in daylight. Wolves howled without pause. Something ancient had begun to stir, and in the tribal hills, where memory still held its grip, the people listened. These were not city folk with calendars and polished idols. These were forest dwellers, bone readers, dancers of fire. They remembered. Their grandmothers had whispered Kali's name over birth water. Their drums still pounded her heartbeat after the rains. When they felt her return, they did not panic. They prepared. These forest cults, rare, half-hidden, and often misnamed, were the first to hold Kali's image before the world had a name for her. Not as an evil, not even as a goddess, but as a presence, a force, a dark, maternal certainty. In the Aravalli Hills, she was called the One with No Eyes. In the northeast they sang to Mother Bone. In the southern Ghats, they laid terracotta figurines in caves, so old even the trees grew around them like pilgrims. Each group had its rites, but all shared one unshakable understanding. Kali could be honored, or ignored, but never deceived. Offerings were made in silence. No brass, no chanting, no golden plates. Only raw things: goat's blood, millet, ash from funeral pyres. Once, a tribe left only salt and broken bangles beneath a neem tree. The next morning, the tree had split in two, and not a bird sang for 3 days. Was it superstition? Historians still argue whether these rituals were part of an early pan-Hindu goddess tradition, or separate. Regional deities eventually folded into the myth of Kali. Some call it syncretism, others call it survival. Either way, Kali's presence was undeniable. She was not invoked casually. She was called only when needed, and always with trembling respect. One tale from the Vindhyas tells of a chieftain whose village was stalked by a beast half jackal, half human, with teeth like knives, and eyes that burned green. The villagers tried traps, poisons, even hired a Brahmin priest to chant away the curse. Nothing worked. Then the oldest woman in the tribe stood up. She walked alone into the jungle, barefoot, with a clay dish of rice and black sesame seeds. Beneath a banyan tree, She smeared her own blood on a stone and whispered Kali's name 3 times. The next morning, the beast was dead, its body untouched, its face twisted in terror. The old woman, she never spoke again, but she smiled often. What frightened outsiders most about these forest rites was not the blood or the darkness. It was the intimacy. Kali was not worshipped from afar. She was invited in, not into temples, but into bodies, through dance, trance, and surrender. You see, the practitioners didn't just speak of her, they became her. Masked dancers would whirl until their limbs forgot ownership, until their eyes turned glassy, and their tongues hung like the goddess's own. Some would shriek, others would prophesy, a few would collapse, their skin burning cold, claiming Kali had kissed them. Mainstream historians often treat these practices as ecstatic rituals, or psycho-spiritual catharsis. French scholars argue they were genuine possessions, Kali's way of reminding the world she was not this symbol, but spirit. Either way, the participants believed, and when belief becomes action, action becomes myth. Not all called her by name, some only knew her as she who comes when things die. In the Thar Desert, shepherds told stories of a woman in blue who appeared before droughts. She would stand atop a single stone, staring west, as if waiting for something the world refused to remember. Her eyes were rimmed in red, her hands always bloody, though no wound could be seen. Once, a child tried to touch her. He lived, but he never spoke again, not because of fear, but because his ears rang with drums no one else could hear. There was something else about Kali that made her worship so different from other gods. She did not promise rewards. She made no contracts. Other deities might offer blessings, prosperity, rain, fertility, success, but Kali offered clarity. You could bring her garlands, yes, but she might strip your illusions instead. You could pray for victory, and she might give you loss so total that your soul cracks open. And only then do you understand what victory truly is. This is why the forest cults revered her, not for safety, but for truth. And truth, as they well knew, is the sharpest blade of all. There's a fringe legend from Orissa that describes a hidden shrine where Kali's image was carved from meteor stone. They say it appeared overnight. The villagers didn't build around it. They simply left it alone. Birds refused to fly above it. Children born nearby grow up with silver in their eyes. Researchers once tried to move the stone. The crane broke. 3 men fell ill. The team leader lost his memory of the entire week. The report was never published. Make of that what you will. It's worth noting that, across India, the reverence for Kali often bypassed the mainstream channels of ritual. She was not typically the deity of polished temples, with well-funded priesthoods. She belonged to the edges, the cremation ground, the forest, the place between sleep and waking, which made her power more haunting and more accessible. Because while most gods demanded purity before prayer, Kali did not. She did not flinch at blood. She did not turn from madness. She walked with those who had nothing left, and loved them. Fiercely in the heart of the tribal lands, they say Kali speaks not in language, but in fire. When a flame moves against the wind, when a corpse burns too fast, when the air grows still for no reason at all, that's when she is listening, or laughing, or coming. No one can say which, but they always light another fire, just in case, to guide her, to warn others, or simply to remember that, somewhere beyond the known, the dark mother of the end waits not with malice, but with teeth. In every great myth, there is a moment when the divine crosses into the mortal not with trumpets or visions, but through silence and fear. And so it was with Kali, as her worship spilled beyond the forests and shadows into places lit by oil, lamps, and watched by kings. The jungle hills, once her hidden sanctuary, could not contain her forever. Word of the wild goddess spread, but it did not spread evenly. It crept a whisper passed from midwife to widow. A song sung low in fields where no gods were said to walk. a scarred soldier muttering her name as he returned from war, his eyes still fixed on something only he had seen. And where these whispers gathered, temples grew, not the marble palaces of the high gods, but strange, crooked shrines built of mud and brick, stained with old blood, hidden behind curtains of bells and incense smoke. These temples did not ask for tithes. They demanded offerings of a different sort: a rooster, a black goat, a mouthful of rum, a clump of hair, and in rare, still whispered cases, more human sacrifice. Two words that clawed the throat of history. Were they real? Did Kali ever ask for human blood? Or was it fear and misunderstanding, perhaps, deliberate, that wove this darker tapestry? The debate still rages. Some scholars say the notion of human sacrifice and Kali worship is the invention of colonial paranoia, a way to paint unfamiliar rituals as savage. Others point to scattered references in ancient text, cryptic lines about the offering of pure life, or red breath. Still others insist it wasn't metaphor. That in times of great calamity, plague, famine, war, some did kneel at Kali's feet and offer not just prayer, but flesh. These stories swirl around a single word: Thuggee. In the 19th century, British officers stationed in India reported something terrifying: a secret network of assassins, called thugs, who worshipped Kali and murdered travelers in her name. The image was irresistible: bands of men cloaked in night, luring victims along roads, strangling them with silk scarves, and burying their bodies in shallow graves, all while chanting prayers to the Black Goddess. To the colonial mind, it was the perfect monster: dark, exotic, pagan, hidden, and so they launched campaigns. Thousands were arrested, dozens hanged, entire regions placed under surveillance. But behind the bold headlines and courtroom sketches, the truth was far murkier. Historians still argue whether the Thuggee cult existed at all, as described. Some say it was wildly exaggerated and Orientalist, myth inflated by a British Empire, eager to justify its civilizing mission. Others believe there were indeed ritual killers, tied not by faith but by profession. Robbers who used religion as a cover. There are even those who claim the thugs were once guardians of sacred roads, protectors who fell into corruption. But one thing is certain: Kali's name was written in the reports over and over again, as patron, as motive, as reason. In one colonial journal, an officer recounts capturing a man accused of 300 murders. "Why did you do it?" he asked. The man smiled, eyes glazed, and whispered, "Because Ma was hungry." Ma meaning mother, meaning Kali. Was it madness, devotion, or both? Even today, the image lingers: the goddess of time and blood, worshipped in secrecy by men who killed without remorse. Yet, in India itself, the story is less certain. Rural priests deny it. Tantric practitioners call it blasphemy, and many believe the British invented a demon to justify the noose. Still, the myth lives on, because myths, especially dark ones, are rarely buried fully. Let's step further into one of these places. A small temple, hidden in a crumbling village, wrapped in banyan roots, and wrapped tighter still in rumor. Inside, the idol is black stone, polished smooth by centuries of oil and hands. Her tongue is silver, her eyes are chipped, but her presence, heavy, it clings to the skin. A few times a year, devotees gather. They bring garlands and ghee. They chant. They offer blood, goat, chicken, sometimes more, and once, so the old women say, a child, not offered, not taken, but chosen. He vanished into the jungle, returned 10 years later with matted hair and a voice like thunder. He refused to speak of where he had been, only that Ma had shown him things not for daylight. Quirky tidbit: in the 17th century, there were reports of travelers in Bengal being warned not to sleep beneath certain trees because those trees were said to be sacred to Kali and full of her whispering spirits. If you dreamed under them, you might never wake sane. Local villagers, of course, laughed at the notion. They're only whispering if you have something to hide, they'd say. But it wasn't just travelers or peasants who feared the goddess. Even kings kept their distance. There are royal records of monarchs commissioning Kali temples but refusing to attend the ceremonies. They would send priests, offer gold, even host festivals in her honor, but appear themselves rarely, because to meet Kali's gaze is to face the end of masks. She sees through jewels and robes. She knows who drinks from silver and lets others starve. She does not grant audience. She judges, and that judgment is swift. A forgotten king of eastern India once boasted that he would master all gods. He ordered the construction of a Kali temple larger than any before it. He summoned 108 goats to be sacrificed in a single night. He brought dancers, fire-breathers, musicians made a spectacle, and on the final day, he stood before the idol and laughed. "She is stone," he said. "What threat is stone?" That night, his palace caught fire. No enemy, no lightning, no witnesses, just flames. And in the ashes, only his crown was found, melted, bent into the shape of a tongue. These stories, true or not, shaped how Kali was seen, not as a goddess to be petitioned, but as one to be respected, feared, and yes, loved, but never lightly, because the line between her gift and her wrath is the width of a single heartbeat. She does not tolerate false offerings. She does not ask for praise. She asks for surrender, not to her, but to truth, and the truth, as the ancients knew, is always bathed in blood, whether literal or metaphorical. So the question remains, did Kali ever truly demand human sacrifice? Perhaps not, perhaps never, but the idea that she might, that she could, is what lingers. It is that possibility that made even tyrants bow, that made conquerors hesitate, that made the forest shrines last longer than marble temples, because in the end, whether she drank blood or only fear, Kali became the measure by which all other darknesses were judged and found wanting. There are moments in the long sweep of myth and history where one figure, rising out of blood and rebellion, seems to carry the shadow of a god. And in India's long-burning past, a handful of such women walked the earth like living echoes of Kali herself, veins threaded with fire, hands practiced with blades, eyes that did not flinch when kings or colonizers drew near. These were not saints. They were not even always heroes, but they were fierce, and they were unbending. And across centuries, from battlefield to backstreet, they called upon Kali not with prayers, but with action. One name still sung in hushed awe is Rani Lakshmi Bai, the warrior queen of Jhansi. She was not born with a sword in her hand. She was born in a time of tension, when the British East India Company had grown fat on treaties and betrayal. Jhansi was a small kingdom, led by her husband the Raja, but when he died without a natural heir, the British moved quickly, citing their doctrine of lapse. In effect, no male heir, no kingdom. They underestimated her. Lakshmi Bai refused to surrender Jhansi. She mounted her horse, tied her infant son to her back, and rode into battle with her armies. She wore armor. She wielded swords in both hands. British generals accustomed to facing timid rulers and compliant nobles spoke of her with a mixture of awe and fear. They nicknamed her India's Joan of Arc, but locals whispered something deeper. She is Kali in flesh. When she died struck down while defending the city, the sky over Jhansi turned the color of rust. Old women wailed in the temples. The river ran sluggish, as if mourning. A statue stands there today, sword raised, eyes fixed forward. Birds do not land on it. Some say they fear her spirit still watches, and she was not the only one. Before her, after her, and hidden between the pages of official record, there were women of the Flame Kali's daughters, whether they knew it or not. In the southern lands, tales persist of Velu Nakayar, a queen who orchestrated the first recorded armed resistance to the British, long before Lakshmi Bai. Trained in martial arts, fluent in multiple languages. She vanished after her husband was killed, only to return years later, with a coalition army, and strike down the very forces who had wronged her. She was known to meditate before a Kali shrine. One of her loyal followers, Kujili, famously soaked herself in ghee, set her body aflame, and hurled herself into the British armory, turning it into a funeral pyre for empire. Who does that? Who becomes a weapon? Only someone whose devotion burns hotter than fear. And in the old folk songs, they call Kuili Ma's own tongue of fire. Sometimes, Kali's spirit did not wear armor. Sometimes, she appeared in those who danced through society's cracks, women not born noble, but bold. In Bengal, there are stories of street priestesses who wandered during famine years, barefoot and caked in ash, blessing the sick and cursing the corrupt. They claimed visions. They spat at landlords. Some walked into the homes of powerful men and dared them to lie. They were often laughed at, until misfortune followed. Then they were feared. Some were imprisoned. Others disappeared. But in narrow alleys, and near crumbling temples, their names are still muttered during eclipses. One such woman, known only as Chamunda, lived in Calcutta during the early 1800s. She wore only red. She slept among the dead. Her temple was a circle of bones under a banyan tree. A British officer once struck her with his cane, accusing her of witchcraft. He drowned in the Hooghly River 3 days later. Coincidence? The people didn't think so. They offered a goat to her tree every new moon for a decade after. A curious mainstream record appears in missionary writings from the late 19th century, describing women in rural provinces who exhibit wild, untamed devotion to a goddess with black skin and red tongue, whom they believe protects them from soldiers and sickness. These women were often illiterate, barefoot, and dismissed as mad, but their prayers held weight, because they were praying not for riches, or marriage, or fame. They prayed for fire. They prayed for storms. They prayed for the collapse of things that deserved to fall. And Kali listened. Quirky tidbit: in some regions of Bengal and Orissa, women praying for justice would secretly draw Kali's eyes in charcoal under the eaves of the house of a wrongdoer. The symbol, simple and wide, was said to invoke her gaze. It was not a threat. It was a warning. She sees. Even today, some homes repaint their eaves every season just in case. Not every devotee of Kali fought with weapons. Some fought with ink. In the 20th century, as India's independence movement grew, poets and radicals invoked Kali in their speeches. She became not just a goddess, but a metaphor for revolt. One poem, smuggled in pamphlets under British noses, declared, "Let us tear the veil of peace. Let us wear the necklace of storm. Ma Kali dances in the firelight, and we are her thunder." This was not religion. It was defiance. It was the moment Kali stepped off the altar and into ideology, and through it all, she remained more than a symbol, because symbols don't bleed, but Kali does. She walks behind soldiers who march without cause. She enters courts where justice is bought and sold. She sits beside midwives whose hands tremble as they deliver life, in places where medicine dares not go. She listens when a girl says no, and no one believes her. And sometimes she answers, not with comfort, with consequence. Historians still debate how much of this is myth, how much metaphor. Some say Kali is the repressed conscience of a broken society, erupting through art and violence. Others argue she is simply misunderstood, goddess of liberation, unfairly cast in shadows. But ask the wronged widow, the defiant daughter, the orphan who spits at the heavens. They know better. They know Ma, and they know her not as legend, but as blood that moves in their own veins. So when you hear her name, remember, she does not sit in palaces. She walks with the wild. She does not bless thee. Powerful, she breathes through those who refuse to break. and in every age where empires rise. With cruelty, there is always, somewhere, a woman who sharpens her blade and whispers, "Ma is watching." What the world fears, it often names wrongly. By the time the British Empire had dug its polished boots deep into Indian soil, the whispers of Kali had become too loud to ignore. But the rulers from across the sea did not understand her language, not the chants, not the dance, and certainly not the blood. To them, Kali was a monster, and monsters must be hunted. It began, of course, with misunderstanding. The British officers, missionaries, and scholars who encountered Kali did not come equipped with context. They arrived with translations, with textbooks, with categories. Their eyes saw her statue stung out, weapons drawn, blood-dripping head swaying from her neckhand. They recoiled. They labeled her demonic. In Victorian England, where women were corseted and gods wore white robes, a black-skinned goddess, standing barefoot on a corpse, was not divine. She was barbaric. They did not ask what she meant. They assumed, and in doing so, they missed everything. The most notorious misinterpretation, as we touched on earlier, was the legend of the Thuggee cult, fueled by journals, sensational novels, and colonial paranoia. The British convinced themselves that tens of thousands of ritual killers roamed India, strangling travelers and offering their bodies to Kali. In 1839, Captain William Sleeman led a massive crackdown, claiming to dismantle this sprawling conspiracy. He wrote long, florid reports detailing how these thugs viewed murder not as crime, but as devotion. He described them as ritualistic, secretive, and bound to Kali by oath and blood. It made excellent reading in London. The newspapers ran wild. The public imagined India as a land where dark goddesses demanded sacrifice and holy murderers prowled the night. But even as arrests and executions stacked up, something felt off. The accused often gave contradictory testimonies. The evidence was sparse, and when the British were asked how they knew these men worshipped Kali, the answer was often, because they said so, or worse, because who else would inspire such horror? Historians today remain divided. Some argue there was no organized Thuggee cult, just scattered criminals that the British inflated into myth. Others suggest there may have been groups who practiced a form of ritual killing, though not nearly in the numbers claimed. Still others believe the entire narrative was a convenient tool to assert moral authority over a complex land. After all, what better way to justify empire than to claim you were saving people from their own gods? Fringe tidbit: British officers once tried to translate Kali's iconography into Christian symbolism. They claimed her standing on Shiva represented evil conquering good, and her garland of heads was proof of her devilish nature. They missed the point entirely. The heads represented ego, the arms represented karma, and the act of stepping on Shiva was not conquest. It was the halting of destructive force by love, but such nuances rarely made it into policy or headlines. Soon, bans were issued. Ritual sacrifice, already a topic of moral anxiety, became a political issue. In Bengal, temples were forced to register and report their practices. Worship of Kali wasn't outlawed directly, but it was discouraged with an iron smile. Educated classes, eager to appease their rulers and appear modern, began to distance themselves from Kali worship. Some even wrote essays declaring her a symbol of India's barbaric past. And so, in urban centers, Kali's temples quieted. The drums fell still, the sacrificial blades dulled, but in the countryside, she thrived, because no law can silence a goddess who lives in bone and shadow. In fact, it was during this period of suppression that Kali grew stronger in the hearts of the poor. Denied temples, they made shrines from dirt. Denied festivals, they sang her name under their breath. Denied idols, they closed their eyes and saw her anyway. Because Kali does not need permission. She does not care for laws drawn in ink. She listens to blood, to grief, to truth. And in an empire built on lies, truth is the sharpest rebellion of all. There is a folk story from rural Bengal, told in hushed tones around the time of Sleeman's campaigns. A village its name lost was ordered to dismantle a Kali shrine. The priest obeyed, fearing imprisonment. But 3 days later, the village well turned black dot. Every fish in the nearby stream floated, belly dash up, women miscarried, children would not sleep. The villagers begged the priest to rebuild the shrine. He refused. That night, he saw a woman in his doorway black as soot, eyes white as lightning, and a tongue so long it coiled on the ground. He woke screaming. The next morning, the shrine was rebuilt. No one asked how. No one ever touched it again. Meanwhile, British writers turned Kali into fiction's favorite villainess. She appeared in penny novels, in plays, in pulp magazines, with lurid covers. Always the same, dark-skinned, bloodthirsty, draped in skulls. One infamous example, The Deceivers, turned her into the embodiment of exotic evil. In it, a white hero infiltrates a Kali-worshipping cult, only to be nearly sacrificed in a temple, full of chanting murderers. It was made into a movie in 1988, shot in India, banned in parts of the country, and still watched by curious students of colonial storytelling. It bore no resemblance to actual ritual, but it burned the image deeper into Western imagination. Quirky note: during the Victorian era, some Englishwomen in India began wearing gold necklaces, styled like Kali's garland, of heads, completely unaware of what it symbolized. Fashion, after all, loves the dramatic, even when the meaning is lost. But the deeper irony, while the colonizers demonized Kali, their own artists and thinkers grew obsessed with destruction as transformation. Poets like William Blake wrote of terrifying feminine forces. Painters began experimenting with images of chaos and rebirth. Occult societies like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn studied Hindu goddesses alongside Egyptian and Greek ones, and in secret, behind locked doors in London and Paris. Some even worshipped Kali, themselves stripped of context, of course, but not of awe. So she survived, misunderstood, twisted, feared, but never forgotten. Kali became a symbol both of India's savage otherness and of its unyielding mystery. The colonizers came with their guns and charts and census documents, but when they left, they took something with them: a whisper, a name, a goddess who had looked them in the eyes, unblinking, and said, "You will pass, I remain." The empire, despite its grand proclamations and gilded maps, eventually crumbled. Its soldiers packed their medals, its governors boarded ships. The Union Jack lowered across 1,000 cities, and the British, who had once tried to legislate, gods went home to their reign and regrets. But Kali remained, not in the palaces they built, nor the dusty archives they left behind, but in the breath of the people. And as India emerged, blinking into independence, the goddess did not vanish into memory. She adapted. She watched from the shadows of new cities. She waited behind the chatter of radios and the clamor of trains. And in time, she stepped once more into fire and light. In the decades after British rule, Kali worship experienced a quiet renaissance. Not the flamboyant, blood-soaked rituals the colonialists had feared, but something more enduring, deeper, more human. Her temples, once whispered about, grew bold again. Bells rang louder, drums returned to their rhythms, and festivals once pushed to the edge of legality now painted entire neighborhoods red and gold. In Bengal, especially, Kali Puja emerged as a centerpiece of cultural life, held during the dark moon night of Diwali, night when most of India worships Lakshmi, goddess of wealth. Bengalis gather instead to honor Kali. They build pandals, temporary, ornate shrines filled with art, incense, and electric light. Sculptors spend weeks molding her form from straw and clay. They paint her tongue with vermilion. Her eyes are made enormous and unblinking. and when the drums begin, they are not delicate, they are thunderous. They say you can feel them in your ribs, even streets away. Thousands gather. They chant her name, and somewhere, beyond the veil of the smoke and music, she listens. One might think the modern world would soften her edges, that a goddess like Kali so raw, so strange would be pushed aside for cleaner icons. That in the age of neon signs and nuclear science, a deity draped in skulls might be out of place, and yet she thrives, because in every age of crisis, Kali becomes necessary. She is the one called when hope feels dishonest. She is the breath behind revolution. She is the flame under the pot of grief, and grief, in the 20th century, boiled over. Partition shattered the subcontinent, families torn, cities burned, trains arrived full of corpses. Refugees poured across new borders, Hindus from Pakistan, Muslims from India, with their own gods, wounds, and rage. Kali's temples became havens, not places of peace, but places of truth. Mothers brought their orphaned children to her feet. Widows clung to her altar cloths, whispering for justice, and through the flames and fractured hymns, she re-emerged, no longer just a goddess of destruction, but a witness, one who had seen the end of worlds before, and would see them again. A curious mainstream historical moment. In 1948, when Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated, a Kali temple in Varanasi reported that the idol's eyes began to weep, not water, but ash. The story was dismissed by officials. Yet 4 months afterward, the temple overflowed with pilgrims, not because they believed in miracles, but because they believed in mourning. And who better to mourn with than she, who walks among the ashes? In modern India, new stories formed around her. She became the mother of the marginalized. In slums and red light districts, her name was etched into crumbling walls. Sex workers painted her on mirrors. Bus drivers taped her picture near their dashboards, eyes wide, tongue out, watching every reckless driver in the rear view. She was no longer confined to clay statues. She lived in posters, stickers, tattoos. She rode on motorcycles. She blinked from the backs of matchboxes and peered through smoke in roadside shrines. Quirky tidbit: in the 1970s, a group of Indian truckers formed a secret club called Ma's Wheel that prayed to Kali before each trip. They would smear engine oil on a black stone at a remote dhaba and whisper, "Keep us fast," and feared. They never had accidents, or so they claimed. Yet it wasn't just the streets that welcomed her. Academics began to study her more seriously. Artists painted her not as a monster, but as a symbol of feminine rage and power. Filmmakers dipped cautiously into her legend. In Satyagit, Ray's 1960 masterpiece, Devi, a young woman is believed to be Kali incarnate by her father. The film explores the line between devotion and delusion, between belief and burden, and in that quiet, tragic story, Kali's shadow looms. Large. Not as a literal force, but as the pressure of expectation, of belief so powerful it bends reality. Of course, not all portrayals were so respectful in the West. Kali's image continued to twist. She appeared in pulp horror novels, always snarling and drenched in blood. In Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, 1984, she was made into a caricature, evil goddess, presiding over heart extraction, ceremonies, and lava pits. Audiences gasped, devotees groaned, historians cringed, and still, her name grew more famous. Sometimes fame is a curse, but Kali does not shy from curses. She wears them. And somewhere, you suspect, she laughed. Meanwhile, in real temples, real flames burned, pilgrims still arrived, and Kali's worship adapted to modernity in strange and powerful ways. In the Kalighat Temple of Kolkata, one of her most sacred sites millions visit each year, the idol is centuries old, black stone, draped in red silk. Her tongue, bright gold, the air, thick with offerings and sweat. But in the alley behind the temple, something curious happens. Young girls sit on the ground with paper fans and boxes of matches. They draw Kali, not from books, from memory, from dreams, from what their grandmothers whispered when the lights went out. They draw her with wings, with 3 faces, with flames for hair. No 2 images alike, each one personal, each one true, because Kali, unlike many deities, does not demand orthodoxy. She demands honesty, and perhaps that is why she endured when so many others faded, because she asks not that you be pure, but that you be real. You can come to her drunk, heartbroken, burning with shame. She will not turn away. You can bring her your rage, your loss, your confusion. She will not fix them, but she will hold them. In a world that loves masks, Kali is the face beneath, and when the drums rise and her image rolls down crowded streets on festival night, it is not celebration, it is revelation. She has walked beside soldiers and scientists. She has been painted by rebels and rappers. She has danced through smoke machines and temple bells, and always her message is the same. Endings are not to be feared. Truth is not polite. And the world, no matter how it shines, must sometimes be broken to be made whole. Night in the temple begins, not with silence, but with sound. The kind of sound that lives in bone. A low, rolling hum from conch shells, swelling against the air like breath in the lungs of the earth itself. The clatter of bells follows next, rapid and chaotic, as if someone's nervous heartbeat had become music. Then the drums, dozens of them roaring into life in unison, and through the smoke of 1,000 incense sticks, her form emerges. Kali, not as legend now, but as presence. Temples dedicated to Kali are unlike any other. They do not hum with quiet, serenity, or polite ritual. They throb with rhythm, with movement, with the energy of surrender. By day, these temples may seem almost ordinary. Pilgrims line up, priests chant, offerings are exchanged, but at night, something shifts, especially during the new moon. That's her time, at Kalighat in Calcutta. Midnight rituals take on a different tone. The inner sanctum grows thick with ghee smoke, and the crowd hushes not out of reverence, but anticipation. A fire is lit not for warmth, but for witness. The statue of Kali, dark and glistening, is decked in fresh hibiscus garlands, blood red against her black stone skin. The floor is washed in water, sandalwood, and if the old stories are to be believed, a few drops of something else. At the moment of offering, the air holds its breath. A goat is brought forward in temples that still practice sacrifice. Not all do. The ritual is swift. One clean stroke, one shudder, one heartbeat. The blood runs into the earth, and the priests touch the forehead of the idol, murmuring secrets no crowd will ever hear. This is not violence for violence's sake. It is exchange, a life for clarity, a moment for balance. To those outside, it seems brutal. To those within, it is sacred, because Kali does not represent the end of life. She represents the honesty of its cost. The rituals vary by region. In Assam, at the Kamakaya temple, an ancient site, shrouded in even more mystery, ceremonies grow stranger. This temple, built atop a yoni-shaped stone representing the divine feminine, doesn't house an idol at all. No face, no form, only the raw symbol of creation and destruction combined. During Ambabachi Mela, it's said the goddess menstruates. The temple shuts down for 3 days, and when it reopens, the cloth used to absorb the goddess's sacred flow is distributed to pilgrims as a blessing. To outsiders, it's baffling. To devotees, it is power in its truest form, the feminine as holy, untamed, and unashamed. Kamakya doesn't whisper the divine, she bleeds it, and Kali walks through those halls as if she never left. Quirky tidbit: some Kali devotees believe the goddess appears in flames, specifically the flicker of a ritual lamp when no wind is present. A sudden gutter of the fire, a twist in the wick, a sudden flare, and she is watching. In many temples, Devotees will sit for hours, simply watching the flame. Eyes open, hearts racing, waiting for her to look back. But the most spellbinding of all experiences comes not in the formal temples, but during open-air Kali nights. Imagine a village square transformed, bamboo scaffolding rising to hold a clay idol 20 feet high, painted black, arms outstretched, mouth open in eternal howl. Around her, hundreds, sometimes thousands of people gather, chanting her name, not chanting for favor, chanting for release. Kali Ma, Kali Ma. The words rise and fall like waves, and in the heart of the crowd, dancers move. These are not performers in sequined costumes. They are entranced. Men and women alike, faces daubed in ash, mouths foaming, eyes rolled upward. Their feet stamp in time with drums, their hands carve shapes into the air. Some carry swords, some carry nothing but silence. They move not for show, but for her, and sometimes they say she moves through them. In one village in West Bengal, a woman known as Bhairavi once danced for 12 hours straight during Kali Puja. She collapsed, skin burning with fever, eyes glassy. When they tried to carry her to rest, she rose again, laughing. She hasn't left yet, she said, voice doubled. Deeper. The priests nodded. They let her dance again. She died the next morning, smiling. Her ashes were mixed with vermilion and offered to the temple. To this day, no one else dances in that spot. It's left empty. For her, mainstream scholars often refer to these moments as ritual possession, classifying them as psychological phenomena, dissociation, trance, cultural hysteria. But ask the villagers who have seen it. Ask the grandmothers who light camphor at her feet. They will tell you, she came. Not metaphorically, not artistically, actually, and whether you believe them or not is your own business. Kali doesn't need belief to function. She arrives whether you're watching or not. It's not all solemn. There is joy in her worship. 2 children run through crowds during Kali Puja, throwing powdered dye into the air. Singers stand at street corners, with harmoniums and cracked voices, singing songs that drift above the drums. Women laugh, men weep. Fireworks burst across the sky, loud enough to rival the chants. And at the center, always, she waits. Unbelenging, unsatisfied, not because she's greedy, but because truth is never finished. It must be sought again and again. In recent years, the rituals have become more elaborate. Lead-lit idols, sound systems that boom like thunder, parades that snake through entire cities. But beneath the spectacle, something remains very old. The feeling that somewhere in the flame and music, beyond the edge of vision, Kali is walking among them, and that if you look at her too long, or say her name too clearly, she might look back in a ritual. A story circulates about a boy who dared to touch the feet of the idol before the ritual began. His hand went numb for a week. Doctors found nothing wrong. The priest only said, "She doesn't like to be touched without warning." Since then, the village starts every puja with a whispered apology, just in case. Historians still debate the evolution of Kali Puja, whether it began as a tantric observance or as a folk tradition absorbed into organized religion. Some trace it to the Pala dynasty. Others say it rose only in the 17th century. But no one disputes this. It is growing. More temples, more devotees, more chants that carry her name on the wind, not because people want fear, but because they crave truth, raw, unfiltered, sacred. And Kali, unlike any other, offers it freely, but never gently. So when the temple bells ring, and the conch wails into the dusk, and the goat's breath fogs in the cool air just before the blade, know this: the ritual is not for the gods, it's for you. To remember, to release, to face the black mirror, and to whisper, through trembling lips, Jai Ma Kali, hail the mother, not because she protects, but because she doesn't flinch. Once confined to jungle shrines and flickering temple fires, Kali stepped into the realm of image and illusion with surprising ease. The world changed, and she changed with it, dragged from the shadows of sacred texts into the bright, buzzing current of modern media. Kali, once feared in whispers, now stared from screens. She began to haunt not just rituals and dreams, but comic books, film reels, pop music, and fashion runways. And somehow, she didn't lose her edge. She sharpened it. The first images of Kali to hit mass print weren't subtle. In 19th century colonial illustrations, she was usually painted as some monstrous idol, eyes wide and bulging, tongue out, always drenched in gore. The artists, mostly British, understood nothing of her symbolism, so they replaced meaning with spectacle. To Western eyes, she was horror. To Indian viewers, she was misrepresented, but the image stuck, and like all powerful myths, once Kali entered pop culture, she could not be stopped. In the early days of Indian cinema, she appeared often but rarely as the central figure. She flickered in the background, her statue looming in black and white frames, her temple, the place where someone went to pray before a great act of vengeance or justice, then came Devi, 1960 by Satyajit Ray, film that did not show Kali herself, but explored what it meant when a woman was mistaken for her. The slow descent of a daughter-in-law turned living goddess blurred the line between faith and madness. The film never answered whether the girl truly was Kali's avatar, but it didn't have to. The uncertainty was the point. It was one of the first modern attempts to ask, what happens when you look into the goddess's eyes and see yourself? Then, in 1984, came something entirely different. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Cue drums, cue lava, cue a villainous high priest yanking hearts out of people's chests in a dark temple dedicated to Kali. It was all wrong, every detail. The filmmakers mashed together pieces of Hinduism, fringe conspiracy theories, and pure fantasy until Kali became a cartoon demoness, bloodthirsty, cruel, surrounded by enslaved children and rivers of molten rock. India was outraged, temples protested, scholars rolled their eyes so hard they probably saw their past lives. And yet, the image stuck again. Millions saw that movie. Many still associate Kali with that single distorted version, and so, her pop culture mythology twisted into two threads. One, the sacred embodiment of death and mother love. The other, a Hollywood horror prop. She wore both, because Kali does not ask to be understood. She demands to be seen. Quirky tidbit, in the 1990s, a famous Indian comic book series, Amar Chitra Katha, released a special edition on Kali. It toned down the gore, focused on her battle with demons, and framed her as a fierce protector. The issue sold out within weeks. Children wrote letters to the publishers, asking for more stories. Some said Kali reminded them of their mothers. Others said they were afraid to sleep after reading it. Both were probably right, but Kali didn't stop with comics. As global pop culture fragmented and scattered, she appeared everywhere. In music, she became a muse for underground bands, particularly in the metal and goth scenes. One British death metal band called themselves Kali Yuga and opened concerts with blood-red lights and Sanskrit chants, half homage, half aesthetic. In fashion, her image graced t-shirts, saris, even high-end couture. Models walked catwalks with her tongue painted across their mouths. Designers called her edgy, avant-garde, and empowering. And yes, occasionally, dangerous. Of course she was. You don't wear Kali without trembling a little. In the world of digital art, she exploded. Social media platforms teemed with reimaginings. Kali with neon hair and LED eyes. Cyberpunk Kali, with wires instead of arms. Minimalist Kali, rendered in 3 black lines and a dot of red. Feminist Kali, stomping out toxic masculinity. Abstract Kali, emerging from glitch and static like a digital ghost. Some were reverent, some were playful, a few, inevitably, were offensive. But through them all, she moved like ink in water shifting, expanding, leaving trails in every artistic pool. One fringe comic from the early 2000s, Kali 2099, imagined her reborn in a dystopian future, fighting a totalitarian regime with swords made of light and vengeance coded into her DNA. It ran for only 6 issues, sold terribly, and is now a collector's item, the writer later admitted. He had a dream about Kali during a fever. She told him to write it. He said no. He got sicker. He wrote it. He got better. Coincidence? That's never the right word with her mainstream scholars. Now explore Kali's presence in global feminism and art theory. One well-known professor at the University of Chicago once remarked that Kali is not a goddess in pop culture. She is pop culture in divine form, angry, shifting, consuming, and rebirthing itself every year. In academic circles, she is sometimes called a postmodern deity, not because she is new, but because she can no longer be defined. She is traditional and rebellious, sacred and shocking, ancient and immediate. She is, in other words, the perfect mirror for an age of contradictions. Meanwhile, in Bollywood, she continued to flicker, sometimes as a protector, her statue glowing in a hero's prayer, sometimes as vengeance incarnate, her face crossfading into the eyes of a wronged woman just before she picks up a gun. In one cult classic, the female protagonist is raped and killed, but returns as Kali incarnate, burning down the entire village. The film was banned in several regions. It remains beloved in others, because while gods forgive, Kali burns clean. Today, if you search online for her, you'll find a sea of images. Some show her in full glory, drenched in blood, weapons out, standing on Shiva's chest. Others soften her, make her blue, calm, almost maternal. GOT. She is sold on tote bags, printed on coffee mugs, tweeted as #GoddessGoals, and yet, visit her temple at night. Stand before her flame, watch the shadows move, and you'll know none of that captures her. Because Kali is not a brand. She is not an aesthetic. She is not content. She is the silence between beats, the fury behind creation, the scream you're too scared to let out, the freedom that doesn't ask permission. So let the comics print her wrong, let the movies twist her, let fashion flirt. Kali remains unchanged, because while everyone else is busy building narratives, she is already dancing on their ashes. To speak of Kali is to speak of boundaries between life and death, rage and peace, the known and the unknowable. But there's one boundary she crosses more than any other, the line between sanity and something else. For centuries, the stories around Kali have bled into tales of possession, of trance, of voices that aren't quite human, whispering through human mouths. Some say these are divine visions. Others say they are madness, and no one, not saints, not scholars, not doctors, can fully tell where one ends and the other begins. It often begins simply, a woman kneeling in prayer, eyes closed, breathing even. Then something shifts, a murmur, low and rhythmic, like breath turning into chant. Her fingers curl, her head tilts, her tongue presses against her lower lip and slips out. Her eyes roll, and then she speaks, but not in her voice. Something deeper, rougher. Sometimes it's Sanskrit she's never learned. Sometimes it's a command. Sometimes it's just laughter, cold and rising, without reason. The people around her step back. They've seen this before. It's called darshan by some, possession by others. But in that moment, she's no longer just herself. She's something more, or something else. These experiences aren't limited to remote villages or unlettered mystics. Even in city temples, even among modern devotees, stories abound of people suddenly taken by Kali during ritual. One Kolkata shopkeeper tells of his sister, quiet, rational, always skeptical, who visited Kaligat after a death in the family. She stood in the temple, placed a single flower at the base of the idol, and then collapsed. not unconscious, awake, but not herself. She began to chant names no one had taught her. She described the funeral pyre in vivid detail before the body had even been burned. The priest declared it a blessing. Her family called a doctor. The doctor found nothing. She never spoke of it again. But she hasn't worn red since. Mainstream psychologists have tried to label these events. They speak of dissociation, cultural trance states, even mass hysteria. And there's truth in that. The human brain is more malleable than we like to admit. But ask those who felt it, and their answers sound different. They say, "It wasn't me," or "I felt her watching," or simply, "I don't remember, but I know something happened." These aren't the words of illness. They're the echoes of encounter. There's a well-known story from the early 1900s about a young woman named Radha in the region of Nadia. She was a temple servant, not quite a priestess, but close. One evening during Kali Puja, she began to dance, not unusual, but her dance didn't stop. For 9 hours, she spun, jumped, contorted, laughed, cried. When she finally collapsed, the hem of her sari was scorched. No one had touched fire. The priests declared her touched by the goddess. A British medical officer stationed nearby called it a hysterical fugue. He wrote a report. She wrote nothing. She joined the temple full-time the next week and never danced again. Fringe tidbit. In some tantric lineages, initiates are trained specifically to enter altered states, where Kali is said to descend into the practitioner. These rites involve fasting, darkness, rhythmic breathing, and the repetition of her Bij mantra seed sound, believed to vibrate with her essence. Some report visions. Some report terror. One practitioner wrote, "She did not speak. She opened her mouth, and I fell into it." He never performed the ritual again, of course. Not every claim of possession is sacred. In some villages, accusations of being touched by Kali have been used cruelly. Women who break social norms, especially widows, unmarried women, or those who refuse family roles are sometimes labeled mad, or worse, witches. In these moments, the goddess becomes a weapon, not hers, ours, used to isolate, to punish, to explain away a world that cannot accept wildness in human form. Historians still argue whether such women were visionaries, victims, or both. But Kali, as ever, exists in contradiction. She empowers and terrifies. She liberates and unnerves. In recent decades, mental health professionals in India have begun collaborating with temple priests, trying to bridge the gap between neurology and spirituality. Some cases of so-called possession have responded well to therapy and medication. Others have not, and there are still instances, rare but striking, where no diagnosis fits, no trauma explains it, no pattern predicts it, only a presence, a shadow that falls across the room just before the voice changes, a scent of hibiscus in a windowless chamber, a whisper from a tongue that does not remember how to speak. One such case made headlines in the 1990s. A young lawyer from Mumbai, brilliant, successful, entirely secular, suffered a nervous collapse after the death of his mother. He retreated to his ancestral village. After weeks of silence, he appeared at the local Kali shrine, barefoot and wild-eyed. Witnesses say he shouted a hymn in perfect Sanskrit, though he had never studied it. He tore off his watch and pressed it into the mouth of the idol. "Time is yours," he reportedly said. He returned to the city the next day, resumed work, never discussed it again. But he visits the shrine every year now, on the anniversary of his mother's death. What are these stories? Psychosis, grief, myth-making, or something else entirely? Some say Kali offers no answers. Others say she is the answer, not the one you want, but the one that remains when everything else falls away. It's worth noting that many of these possessions or visions don't end in madness. Some end in peace and clarity. There are men and women who say they met Kali during a seizure, a dream, a near-death experience, and emerged not broken, but reborn. They describe the moment as a fire that burned away lies, as a silence where fear dissolved, as a mirror that showed them not what they wanted to see, but what they needed. Kali is, above all, a goddess of thresholds, and thresholds are not safe. They are bridges, mouths, wounds. They can open into madness or enlightenment, and sometimes the difference is only the willingness to walk through. So the next time someone says they saw her, don't laugh, don't call it superstition, don't reduce it to chemistry. Instead, consider this. What if the goddess does not speak through thunder or lightning? What if she speaks through the fracture, the twitch, the dream, the moment you forget who you are and remember what you've always been? And if you ever feel the room grow too still, if you smell smoke without fire, if your own tongue begins to move without your consent or panic, just listen and remember, she's not here to break you. She's here to burn away everything that isn't you. There are gods who build, gods who bless, gods who bring rain and light, who smile from marble altars and nod gently through chants composed in measured rhyme. And then there is Kali, who howls, who stomps, who dares you to break everything, especially the rules. And so, it's no surprise that in the modern age, it is not kings or priests who most fiercely invoke her name. It is the disobedient, the radical, the ones born outside the lines. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Kali has become a rallying cry far beyond temples and tantrics. She has been rediscovered and redefined by women's rights activists, anti-caste movements, queer theorists, and social rebels who find in her image not terror, but permission. Permission to rage, permission to demand, permission to exist loudly. In a world that prefers its goddesses, quiet, feminist, scholars were among the first to reclaim her. They looked past the colonial horror stories and saw, instead, a goddess unafraid to be powerful not as a sidekick or consort, but in her own chaotic, commanding right. Kali did not need rescuing. She did the rescuing, and she did it drenched in blood, laughing, teeth bared. In the 1970s and 80s, as feminist theology began challenging patriarchal norms in religion, Kali became a central figure in global discussions of the wild feminine. Writers like Elizabeth U. Harding and Rachel McDermott examined her not just as a Hindu figure, but as an archetype of suppressed rage and sacred femininity. And suddenly, temples weren't the only place you could find her. She appeared in essays, on zines, in murals painted on college walls. Her image tongue out, arms spread, 1 foot on Shiva's chest was no longer feared, it was revered. In Delhi, a group of university students began hosting Kali nights, informal gatherings, where women shared stories of anger. They read poetry. They screamed. They sang songs once banned by their families. They lit candles in a circle around a hand-drawn image of Kali, each flickering flame. A confession. Some whispered stories of assault. Others spoke of being silenced. One woman, a Dalit student, painted her lips with red pigment and recited, "They say Kali's mouth is open for blood. I say it's open because she will no longer be quiet." No priest presided, no offerings made, and yet, the air thrummed with something holy, quirky detail. In 2012, an Indian street artist known only by the pseudonym Mara began spray painting images of Kali across train stations in Mumbai. But, in his version, she wore a gas mask. Her garland of heads was replaced by microphones. Her foot was placed on a businessman in a suit. The message was clear. She was not just destruction, she was disruption. The images were scrubbed by authorities, but new ones kept appearing, sometimes overnight, sometimes where cameras didn't work, just like the goddess herself. Beyond gender, Dalit and Bahujan activists have also embraced Kali as a symbol of resistance. In a religious landscape dominated by upper caste aesthetics where purity is prized and compliance rewarded, Kali is the ultimate rejection. She is black-skinned. She is blood-soaked. She is wild, rural, tribal. She does not ask permission from Brahmins. She steps on them, sometimes literally, depending on the folk art, to those born at the bottom of a cruel hierarchy. Kali is not frightening. She is family, because she has never lived at the top. She lives at the edge, and she is still burning it all down. In Chennai, a collective of anti-caste artists redesigned a traditional Kali idol. They replaced her weapons with tools of labor: a broom, a plow, a trowel, a weaving shuttle. She stood not on Shiva, but on a broken golden throne, her tongue still out but now painted with the words, "I speak." The statue toured art galleries. Some found it blasphemous. Others called it liberation in clay. Queer communities, too, have found kinship in Kali, particularly in India, where colonial-era laws once criminalized homosexuality and gender variance. The image of a goddess beyond norms offered shelter. Because what is Kali if not a rejection of binaries? She is mother and destroyer. She is fierce and nurturing. She wears skulls and smiles. She defies all expectations of what a woman should be, and that defiance is holy. In Calcutta, a transgender activist named Annapurna founded a group called Kali's Children. The organization provides housing, legal aid, and spiritual community to queer and trans individuals. Rejected by their families, they hold rituals, they read scriptures, they dance around a Kali idol hand-built from recycled materials. She accepts us as we are, Annapurna says, because she was never what the world wanted either. Even outside India, Kali has found a voice. In New York and London, feminist performance artists paint their bodies black, douse themselves in red dye, and perform dances inspired by her mythos, often in protest spaces. Outside government buildings, in front of cathedrals, they chant her names like mantras and scream when the crowd flinches. Because Kali is not here to be safe. She's here to be true, mainstream. Religious institutions don't always know what to do with this. Some temples embrace the broader, modern embrace of Kali, especially during public festivals and cultural showcases. Others reject it, saying, Kali must be honored within ritual bounds, that she is not a tool for protest, not a mascot for movements. Historians still argue over whether Kali's role has truly changed, or whether we're simply now paying attention to a side of her that was always there. Perhaps both are true. After all, what is more Kali than contradiction? But ask her, devotees, those in art studios, protest marches, and midnight rituals, and they will tell you, Kali has not changed. We have. And as we peel away our pretenses, our dogmas, our domesticated ideas of holiness, we meet her as she has always been, unapologetic, unashamed, unstoppable. Because in a world where women are told to be soft, where the poor are told to be quiet, where the queer are told to disappear, Kali stands tall, laughing, tongue out, necklace of truth jangling against her chest, and says, I was never made to please you. I was made to free you. In the stories, when Kali dances, the earth shakes, not because she is heavy, but because she is honest. Because her feet remember the rhythm of beginnings and endings. Because when she moves, time trips over itself. And because what she dances isn't joy or grief, war or peace, is truth, wearing no mask. But this isn't just legend. Kali's dance is real, and it's everywhere, in temples and fields. On rooftops and stages, people have danced for Kali since the beginning. And not with tidy choreography or velvet costumes, but with fire in their blood, ash on their foreheads, and the rhythm of drums echoing in their ribs. This dance isn't performance, it's transformation. It's how the body becomes prayer, how movement becomes memory, and how surrender becomes power. In Bengal, during Shama Puja, dancers known as sannyasis spin barefoot on burning coals. Their bodies jerk and twist not gracefully, but purposefully hands slicing the air, eyes rolled upward, tongues out. Mimicking the goddess herself, they dance through pain, they dance through exhaustion, they dance until they collapse, face down in the dirt, the shape of a star, and the people watching do not cheer. They weep, because this is not a show, it is a message. Kali is not in the statue, she is in that moment, when the body gives in, when the ego burns away, when only the truth remains. And in these rituals, she does not come alone. Music follows her, not the kind you hum on a quiet walk, but thunder, curtains and chants that rise in pitch and volume until they blur the line between melody and battle cry. The most famous is Jai Ma Kali, victory to the mother. It isn't whispered, it's roared by thousands, by one, by both, because when you shout her name with your whole chest, she hears you differently. Quirky tidbit. In rural Bihar, it's common for villagers to place small earthen pots on their heads and dance for Kali under the full moon. If the pot doesn't fall, they believe the goddess is pleased. If it does, they say it's a sign she's impatient. And sometimes, they say, the pot falls upwards. No one's quite sure what that means, but they light another lamp, just in case. Kali's worship through movement is most deeply preserved in tantric tradition. Here, dance is not celebration, it is ritual. In the dark sanctums of tantric spaces, men and women, sometimes clothed, sometimes not, move in spirals, repeating mantras in low tones, creating a vortex of sound and energy meant to summon her. This is not the stuff of public festivals. This is quiet, private, almost forgotten, but still alive, because in Tantra, Kali is the Shakti, the raw, primal, feminine force that underlies all existence. She is Kundalini uncoiled, the serpent at the base of the spine rising through chakras with each beat of the drum. Dancers here do not pretend to be her, they become her, or rather, they remember they were her all along. Mainstream scholars often shy away from Tantra, labeling it esoteric or transgressive, and it is deliberately so. Tantra breaks rules. Tantra asks uncomfortable questions. Tantra invokes Kali not with incense and flowers, but with the full weight of the self. Stand naked before her. A tantric text reads, and see if you survive the gaze. Spoiler, you don't. Because the you that walked in the polite one, the safe one, the one who hides behind titles and fears, won't come out. Only truth does. There is a story of a young man from Maharashtra who trained in classical dance but grew restless. He abandoned his studies, traveled to Varanasi, and began dancing only for Kali alone. Every night, on the burning ghats, locals called him mad. He called it love. He danced even during storms. Once, lightning struck the river near his feet. He didn't stop. He said later, it wasn't lightning. She blinked. He danced for 7 years, then vanished. No one ever found his body, only his bells, still ringing beyond temples and rites. Kali's dance has spilled into the world in unexpected ways. In urban clubs, electronic music artists have sampled Kali, Bij mantras, overlaying them with pulsing beats. Ravers sway, unaware that they're moving to syllables once whispered in cremation grounds. In modern stage performances, choreographers blend Bharatanatyam with Butoh, flamenco with Odissi, evoking her fury in high heels and LED lights. She is still there, because wherever there is movement, without apology, Kali waits, and it's not always visible. Sometimes, Kali's dance is quiet, the quiet spin of a woman sweeping her home after leaving a man who hit her, the steady steps of a farmer walking back into drought, refusing to surrender, the shaken, a young person's shoulders as they come out to their family, voice breaking but unbowed. These are dances too, slow, uneven. Holy. Historians still debate the origins of Kali's dance traditions, whether they grew from pre-Vedic fertility rites, tribal possession ceremonies, or were stylized later by temple communities. But the debates miss the point, because the dance was never about origin. It was about what moved, and why. At a Kali temple in Assam, there is a night once a year, where all worship is silent. No drums, no chants, just footsteps, one by one. Devotees walk barefoot around the idol, some alone, some hand in hand, each with their own rhythm, some slow, some stumbling, some spinning without warning. It is said that on this night, the goddess listens only. 2 footsteps. She hears truth in the way we move, not in what we say. So if you ever feel your foot tap, your hips sway, your body move without music, don't hold it in. Let it rise. Let the rhythm bloom. And if the beat grows wild, if your hands start carving space, like they remember something older than your bones, good, she's near. And you're dancing right, because Kali doesn't care if it's pretty. She cares if it's true. Beneath every flame Kali lights, there is a shadow. She is not just death, not just rage, not only the scream in the night, or the dance among the ashes. She is a paradox, standing calmly at the edge of the known world, wearing a smile that doesn't belong on someone covered in blood. And it's there, just under the surface of the fear she inspires, that you find her second face, the mother. This is the part of her story that twists like smoke, never fully settling. For all her fangs and weapons, for every demon she has gutted, and every illusion she has shredded, there exists a quieter truth. Kali is also love, fierce, yes, uncompromising, absolutely, but love all the same, and not the soft, pink, romantic kind. Hers is not the love that smooths your hair and says everything will be fine. It's the love that tears away lies, that strips ego to the bone, that holds your head under the river, until you stop pretending, and finally breathe. In many villages across Bengal, Kali is not addressed with fear. She is called Mama. The children touch her feet during festivals. Women tell their worries to her idol, like a friend. Old men cry in front of her, asking not for wealth or victory, but just a little more strength. And she listens, because while Kali's hands may be full of weapons, they are still hands. They carry, they cradle, they cleanse. A mainstream historical fact. In 19th century Bengal, the poet Ramprasad Sen wrote hundreds of devotional songs to Kali, not as a warrior or destroyer, but as his mother. His poems are strange and stunning, full of grief, playfulness, and tenderness. He called her naughty. He called her forgetful. He joked that she gave all her blessings to fools, and left her true children begging. But still, he loved her, and in his final days, it's said, he asked, not for heaven, not for peace, but simply to die with her name in his mouth. Many of his songs are still sung today, echoing in candlelit courtyards and crowded trains. In his verses, Kali becomes something unexpected, accessible, not a queen, not a force, but a mother who forgets to cook, who lets the rice burn while she dances, who smiles too wide and hugs too tight. This side of her isn't contradiction, it's completion, because what Kali destroys, she also protects. What she kills, she also births again. She is the circle that never closes but never breaks. Fringe belief. Certain tantrikas believe that Kali exists in 2 states simultaneously. The first is Kali the fierce, who devours the universe. The second is Kali the loving, who rebuilds it atom by atom. They say that those who truly worship her must see both, and that the moment you do, you stop fearing death, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you understand it is only half the story. In this vision, death is not the end, but the sigh before rebirth. Kali, then, is the cosmic reset button. She doesn't punish, she clears, like fire clearing a forest, like silence. After screaming, she erases the false so the real can rise. There is a statue in a quiet temple in Tripura, where Kali holds a baby. Yes, a baby. The infant nestles in her many arms, yawning, unaware of the skulls, the swords, the history written in flame. Some say it represents Shiva, reborn. Others say it's the devotee, a reminder that even in her fiercest form, the goddess holds space for innocence. Pilgrims weep in front of that statue, not from fear, but from relief, because even the fierce have tenderness, and even the destroyer can cradle life. There's a story often told during Kali Puja. A young girl, terrified by the statues of the goddess, refused to enter the temple. Her grandmother, wise and wrinkled, took her hand and said, "Come. She scares you because you have not met her when she is quiet." She lit a small daya, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Ma, show her your other face." The girl says the statue smiled, and when she stepped forward, the room grew warm. That night, she slept soundly. Historians still explore whether this duality in Kali is ancient or developed over time. Some trace it to tribal origins, where nature, spirits were both feared and revered. Others believe the maternal aspect was emphasized later to make her more palatable, but such academic scaffolding often misses the lived experience to those who call her Ma. There's no contradiction, there's just Kali. Sharp-edged and soft-hearted, tearing and healing, always real, even in iconography. The signs are there, the skulls around her neck. Yes, they represent severed egos, but count them 50-2, each one a Sanskrit letter. Together, they form language. Creation, so even as she wears death, she speaks life. Her long tongue, a symbol of shame, some say for stepping on her husband, but others say it is a laugh, an irreverent, irrepressible laugh that dares you to stop pretending. Because you're not fooling her, not now, not ever. Quirky note: in some rural homes, Kali is given small gifts, tiny bangles, miniature clay combs, silk ribbons, as if she were a beloved aunt who visits during festivals. They say it pleases her, and if she's pleased, she watches over the house, not with thunder, but with presence. So how does one reconcile these two Kalis? The one with blood in her mouth and heads in her hands, and the one who whispers lullabies into the ears of broken people? Maybe the answer is, you don't. You hold them both. Because to love Kali is to love the full truth. That rage can coexist with tenderness. That endings are sometimes beginnings in disguise. That the mother who frightens you may also be the one who catches you when you fall. One last story. A man once asked a sage, "Why does Kali wear a garland of skulls?" The sage replied, "Each skull is someone who asked her for only half of who she is. So she gave them that half and wore the rest." And then he smiled, "You asked for both. So you may keep your head. For now. So the next time you see her, statue, black stone, mouth open, weapons out, look again, and you might see it. The tiniest trace of a smile, not cruel, not mocking, but welcoming. Because the mother who ends you is also the mother who waits to begin again." They say you must never look too long into the eyes of a god, but with Kali, the warning comes too late. By the time you've met her, gaze her wild, lidless stare, you're already caught. There's no going back to before. No pretending she was just a statue. No telling yourself it was only story, or symbol, or myth. Something in you is already unraveling, because when you meet her eyes, you don't just see her. You see yourself, all of yourself. The parts you love, the parts you hide, the versions of you you've buried beneath politeness, duty, and fear. And she sees them too, all of them, without blinking. So what does Kali want from you? This question has circled for centuries. Pilgrims, mystics, poets, priests, Sage has asked it, each in their own trembling way. Does she want blood? Does she want worship? Does she want sacrifice, offerings, loyalty, fear? The answers vary, but none of them feel complete, because Kali isn't a goddess you please. She's not there to give you what you want. She's there to take what you no longer need. In tantric traditions, Kali's demand is clear. She wants your ego, your illusion of control, your false separateness, your addiction to pretending, not just the soft lies you tell others, but the deep, clinging ones. You tell yourself that you are powerless, or unlovable, or eternal, or clean. She wants all of that, and she will rip it from you, gently if she can, violently if she must, but always for one reason, so that you can be free. There is a saying among certain Kali devotees: she doesn't punish, she purifies. It sounds simple, but purification, with her, is never tidy. It comes through loss, through failure, through falling so far you can't see the sky, and then realizing the ground was always holy. To be loved by Kali is to be unmade and then remade stronger, to be broken in the exact place. You've built your biggest walls. A fringe tantric meditation invites the practitioner to sit in darkness and whisper, "Take what is false, leave what is real, I am ready." It is not recited lightly, because once you say it, she listens, and she will come. Not always with visions or possession, sometimes with a lost job, sometimes with a broken relationship, sometimes with a terrifying clarity that leaves you gasping. And in each moment, she will ask, "Do you still want truth?" If you say no, she leaves, not out of spite, but respect. You're not ready. If you say yes, she opens her mouth, and the world, as you knew it, ends. There's an old Bengali story of a man who came to the temple every new moon, bringing sweets and flowers and silk scarves. He prayed loudly, dressed well, gave generously, but nothing changed. His life remained hollow. One night, he brought no offering. He walked in barefoot, head low, hands empty. He said, "I have nothing left." And for the first time, the statue seemed to smile, because she never wanted his gifts. She wanted him, without masks, without armor. Kali does not need perfection. She needs presence. She needs your trembling, your questions, your cracked voice saying, "I don't know what to do," because that's where the real surrender starts, not in rituals, but in rawness. Mainstream theologians describe this as Kali's role as the liberator, not just from rebirth, but from illusion itself. She is called Moksha Dayinatha, one who grants release, not comfort, not security, but freedom. And if you think that sounds easy, you haven't met her. Because to be free is to stop blaming, to stop hiding, to face your own soul with open eyes. And Kali, she holds the mirror. Quirky note: in some parts of South India, Kali is believed to visit dreams before major life changes. She doesn't speak. She doesn't move. She just stares. And those who've had such dreams say they woke up crying and then changed everything. Quit jobs, left marriages, burned their diaries, started again. Not because she told them to, but because they finally understood what they were avoiding. So again, what does Kali want? She wants you to become not someone else, not something more, but what you were before the pretending started, before shame curled into your spine, before the world said, "Not that way," before you told your own soul to be quiet. She wants the real. No apologies, no edits, just truth. Even if it howls, even if it's bloody, even if it's wild, especially then. A monk once said, "All other gods ask for your praise. Kali asks for your truth." Most people find that harder. He's right, because praise is easy. Truth is not, especially when it breaks you open. But those who've said yes to her know something others don't. That on the other side of the breaking is peace. Not the soft, warm peace of forgetting. The sharp, clear peace of knowing who you aren't, not needing to explain it to anyone. The peace of sleeping under stars without needing walls. The peace of not fearing the end, because you've met it before and called it mother. One last image. A woman sits alone by a river, candle beside her, eyes red from weeping. She has lost something, or maybe everything. She lifts her head, whispers one name, and in the silence that follows, she feels it. Not a voice, not a vision, but a presence, heavy, holy, unshakable, unshakable. Kali has come, not to fix her, but to sit beside her in the dark. Because that's what Kali does. She shows up when everyone else has left, and reminds you, you were never alone. You are only forgetting who you really are. Asterisk. There is a dance older than planets, a rhythm not marked by clocks, but by collapse. And when all else ends, when the mountains crumble, the oceans boil dry, the stars fold inward, like tired eyes, Kali will rise again. Not in rage, not even in judgment, but in completion. Because this is her nature, to unmake what has outlived its purpose, to clear the illusions of permanence, to dance the final breath of a world and make room for what must come next. In Hindu cosmology, time is not linear, it spirals, cycles within cycles, epochs blooming and dying like wildflowers. These cycles are called yugas, and we are said to live now in the last of them. Kali, Yuga. Named after her, but not because she causes it, because she's the one who stands in the storm, watching. Because when the lies pile too high, the greed runs unchecked, the violence becomes habit, and truth is mocked as weakness. It's time for Kali. Not to punish. To purge. Kali Yuga is a world where Dharma, the cosmic order, crumbles, where kings are corrupt, teachers are false, and even gods seem distant. It is the age of forgetting. And yet, paradoxically, it is the most sacred. Because only in this chaos can true awakening happen. When all supports fall, you must walk on your own feet. When nothing makes sense, only truth remains. And Kali, terrible and beautiful, walks through the ruins not in despair, but in quiet joy, because her work has begun. Tantric sages teach that at the end of Kali Yuga, Kali will dance one final time. Her dance will be slow, not frantic, like in the battlefields of old, measured heavy. With each step, reality itself will fold inward. First the sky, then the sea, then the names, the faces, the gods, the fears, the dreams. Even time will sigh and step aside, and only she will remain for one breath before the next world begins. This isn't death, it's the deepest kind of birth, not of new things, but of new eyes to see what has always been. Because destruction isn't the opposite of creation, it's the other side of its face, and Kali is the turning of that face. She is the blink between lives, the pause between thoughts, the stillness after a scream. There is a story, not scripture, not canon, but whispered by mystics of what the final dance will look like. The sky will turn the color of burnt embers, the rivers will rise, not in flood, but in song. Animals will grow silent, not in fear, but in reverence, and in the center of the last city, whatever city it is, she will appear, no statue, no chance, just her. Naked, untamed, unafraid, and people will see her not as something outside, but as something familiar. They will remember, and some will fall to their knees, not in terror, but in relief, because the end is not lost. It is truth, with nothing left to hide. Quirky prophecy from some tantric schools. When Kali ends the world, she will not do it with a weapon, but with a smile, and those who fear her will vanish. But those who have loved her even in confusion will step into her arms and become the new stars. There are worse fates, so what do we do with this? What does it mean to live in the time of Kali? To breathe in a world that's already burning. To walk streets cracked with corruption. To wake up to wars, injustice, exhaustion. It means this: we are not waiting for Kali. She's already here. The question is not when she comes, it's whether we're willing to see her in the mirror, in the protest, in the breakdown that saves a life, in the child who dares to speak truth, before learning to be afraid. Because Kali doesn't come to save you from the fire. She is the fire. And maybe, just maybe, you were always meant to burn, not into ash. But into light. And when she dances her final dance, The stars won't mourn, they'll join her, because all things end, and all endings in her hands are beautiful. And now, the storm has passed, the drums have faded, the incense has curled into nothing, the statues are still, even the rivers seem to flow more quietly. You can breathe now. Whatever fear her name stirred in you, let it go. Because the truth is, Kali was never coming to hurt you. She was coming to set you free. Free from the need to be perfect. Free from the pressure to be small. Free from the illusions you've carried for too long disguised as kindness, obedience, safety. Let her take them. Let her carry what no longer belongs. Feel her footstep, not as destruction, but as permission to rest, to rage, to exist exactly as you are. Let her many arms hold what's too heavy. Let her fierce face scare away what still clings to you in the dark. And now that you've met her, not just the myth, but the mirror, may you walk into your own life a little different, a little bolder, a little more like someone who knows what fire tastes like. Close your eyes now. Let her be the silence that follows the storm. Let her be the lullaby that doesn't promise ease, but promises truth. Because truth, in the end, is the softest place to fall. Good night, and Jai Ma Kali.